I woke up at 4 in the morning with that urgent need to go to the bathroom. The room was silent, only his soft snoring broke the silence. I got up slowly, trying not to make any noise, and that's when I noticed he was there, on the other bed a few meters away. The heat of the night seemed to have made him uncover himself, and the sheet was tossed aside, almost falling to the floor. He was lying on his back, one arm thrown to the side, and the other resting on his chest. Even in the dim light of the room, I could see the shape of his relaxed body, his skin slightly illuminated by the faint light coming through the window. There was something about that scene that caught my attention, something I couldn't ignore. He seemed so carefree, so at ease. And yes, there was an obvious excitement, something that the volume made clear, even without me wanting to notice. I stood still for a moment, looking at him, feeling a whirlwind of thoughts invading my mind. It was strange, confusing, but also fascinating. I knew I shouldn't stay there watching, so I forced myself to go to the bathroom. In the bathroom, the bright light made me blink, and I saw myself in the mirror, trying to process what I was feeling. My heart was beating faster than usual, and I didn't know if it was because of the interrupted sleep or something else. I washed my face, trying to calm down, but the images of that scene wouldn't leave my head. On the way back, I walked slowly, almost not wanting to reach my bed. He was still in the same position, motionless, as if the world outside didn't exist. I sat on the edge of my bed, looking at him, trying to understand what it all meant. I didn't think twice. I just knew that at that moment, everything seemed different. But let me start from the beginning so you can understand what happened. My name is Chris, and I was 18 years old, living in the countryside with my parents, where nothing new ever happened. The days dragged on, always the same, marked by the rooster's crow at dawn, the smell of strong coffee in the kitchen, and the sun beating down on the dry land outside, until one day, something different happened. A traveling salesman came to our house. He had shown up a few times before, and from the first time, something about him caught my eye. He was a clean-shaven man, with short, graying hair, his skin slightly tanned by the sun of the roads. There was a serene air about him, a calm way of speaking that made me pay attention to every word. Normally, he would come in the morning, when the dew was still melting on the grass, and the smell of the earth was fresh. But that day, he came in the late afternoon, arriving by car. The sound of the engine cut through the silence of the evening, and the headlights swept over the dirt road before he parked in front of the house. The sky was already painted in orange hues, and a gentle breeze began to ease the heat of the day. The sound of crickets mixed with the crackling of wood burning in the stove. Since his town was far away and the journey back would be difficult at that hour, my parents, always hospitable, offered him a place to stay for the night. My heart beat differently. Something there changed the monotonous routine I knew so well. He accepted without hesitation, with a calm smile, as if he had been expecting that invitation. My room had 2 beds, so he would sleep there with me. While my parents organized things in the kitchen, he entered the room and, without rushing, placed his bag next to the bed he would use. The zipper slid smoothly as he opened it, but I didn't look directly. I just glanced over while pretending to be busy with something else. Then he went to take a shower. The shower hissed as the hot water started to fall, and for a few minutes, all you could hear was the sound of the water running down the drain. Steam soon escaped through the crack in the bathroom door, bringing a clean smell of soap mixed with the coolness of the night coming through the open window. When he returned, already ready, we all sat at the table for dinner. The usual simple food seemed different that night, maybe because of his presence, maybe because of the silence that, from time to time, was broken by the sound of cutlery hitting the plates. I tried not to stare too much, but my attention kept turning to every gesture of his, to the way he held the glass, how he smiled slightly when he heard something funny. The night moved slowly, and the feeling that something was different didn't leave me. We stayed talking for a while, his voice sounding calm in the silence of the night. The house was quieter now, only the sound of crickets outside filling the spaces between one sentence and another. The faint light from the lantern on the table created soft shadows on his face, highlighting his features in the dim light. After a while, I said I was sleepy. Gradually, the conversation died down, and everyone decided to retire. In the room, The only light came from the moon entering through the crack in the window, casting a soft glow on the wooden floor. I lay down first, pulled the sheet up to my waist, and turned to face the wall, feeling his presence on the other side of the room as he settled into bed. His mattress creaked slightly as he adjusted himself, letting out a tired sigh. The silence between us stretched out until his breathing became slower and more rhythmic. Gradually, without effort, sleep came to me as well. I woke up in the middle of the night with the need to go to the bathroom. The house was completely silent, and the darkness seemed denser, broken only by the faint glow of the moon still coming through the window. I moved carefully, trying not to make any noise. The mattress creaked slightly as I got up, and I felt the wooden floor under my bare feet. The night air was still warm, stuffy, clinging a bit to my skin. I glanced at the other bed. He was sleeping deeply, breathing calmly and rhythmically. The carefree position, his chest rising and falling in the dark, the relaxed silhouette. For a second, I stood there, as if my body resisted leaving the room. But I quickly shook my head and walked down the silent hallway to the bathroom. On the way back, I walked slowly, almost not wanting to reach my bed. He was still in the same position, motionless, as if the world outside didn't exist. I sat on the edge of my bed, looking at him, trying to understand what it all meant. I didn't think twice. I just knew that, at that moment, everything seemed different. When I sat on his bed, I didn't hold back. I started to caress it carefully, trying not to wake him. I could see his calm face, still deep in sleep. My hand moved slowly, almost without me realizing it, as I watched his expression, trying to understand what I was doing. The room was enveloped in a warm dimness, only the soft light of the moon coming through the crack in the window, creating a strip of brightness that cut through the room. The silence was broken only by the sound of his breathing, calm and deep, as he still slept. I sat by the bed, feeling the weight of the moment, as if the world had stopped around me. My hands trembled slightly as I leaned in, closing my eyes for a moment, as if I needed to convince myself that this was real. Then, with a care I didn't even know I had, I began. Each movement was slow, calculated, as if I were exploring something new and yet familiar. It was then that he woke up to the warmth of my mouth. I felt his body move, his breathing change, and when I looked up, our eyes met. He didn't say anything, just placed his hand on my head, guiding me with a gentleness that surprised me. His touch was firm, but at the same time gentle, as if he knew exactly what I needed. We didn't stop. He continued to guide me, and I followed, now with more confidence, feeling the connection between us grow stronger with each moment. That moment seemed to last an eternity, as if time had ceased to exist, and only he and I remained, and the intensity of what we were experiencing. After a while, I felt his body tense, his breathing become faster and deeper. He didn't say anything, but his hand on my head tightened slightly, as if trying to guide me without words. I continued, feeling the intensity of the moment increase, until finally he reached his peak. A warmth spread, a slight contraction, and then he relaxed, his hand sliding gently from my head to the pillow. I stayed there, feeling the taste and texture, something that was new to me but somehow felt right. There was something intimate about it, something that couldn't be explained with words. He opened his eyes and looked at me, and I could see a mix of gratitude and something else, something I couldn't name. We didn't need to speak. In that moment, all that mattered was the connection we had shared, something that went beyond the physical, something that touched the soul. I went back to my bed and lay down, but I couldn't sleep. It wouldn't leave my head. Every detail, every sensation, every exchange glance between us seemed etched into my mind. I wanted more. I felt a need I couldn't explain, but it was dangerous there. My parents could hear, and the thought of being discovered filled me with fear. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that I needed to stop, that this couldn't continue. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. What I had experienced was intense, it was real, and I didn't know if I could ignore it. With every passing minute, the urge to get up and go back to him grew, but the fear of being caught kept me pinned to my bed. I ended up falling asleep, exhausted from the restless night and the confusion of emotions consuming me. When I woke up, he was no longer in bed. For a moment, I thought he had left, that it had all been just an intense dream. But when I heard voices in the kitchen, I got up slowly, still groggy, and went to see what was happening. To my surprise, he was there, sitting at the table, drinking coffee and chatting with my parents as if nothing had happened. He seemed so natural, so at ease, that for a moment I wondered if I had imagined it all. But then he saw me, and our eyes met. He smiled slightly and said, "Good morning. Did you manage to sleep with me snoring?" I smiled back, trying to hide the mix of relief and nervousness I felt, and replied, "I didn't even notice you snored." He chuckled softly, and my parents continued the conversation as if nothing was out of the ordinary. But in that moment, I knew something had changed between us, something that couldn't be ignored. We finished breakfast, and the atmosphere in the kitchen was light, almost as if nothing had happened that night. My parents chatted animatedly, and he seemed completely at ease, as if he had been part of the family for years. Then he looked at me and asked, "What are you doing today?" I glanced at my parents, hesitant, and replied, "Nothing, I guess. Why?" He smiled, that smile that was already making me feel things I couldn't name, and said, "I have to visit some clients today. Want to come with me?" The question caught me off guard. My parents looked at me, waiting for my answer, and I felt a mix of anxiety and excitement. It was a chance to spend more time with him, to understand what was happening between us. But it was also risky. What would my parents think? What did I think? "Sure," I said, trying to sound casual. "Why not?" He nodded, satisfied, and my parents went back to chatting as if everything was perfectly normal. But inside, I knew that decision could change everything. I put on some comfortable clothes, and within minutes, we were ready to go. Throughout the day, everything was incredibly light. We laughed, joked, and there were several suggestive hints between us, as if we were testing the limits of what could be said without actually saying it. It was fun, but there was also a tension in the air, an energy we couldn't ignore. At one point, while we were driving to the next appointment, he broke the silence with a sentence that completely caught me off guard. "I liked last night." I almost choked on air. My heart raced, and I found myself struggling to stay calm. He kept driving as if he hadn't just dropped a bombshell, but I could see a slight smile at the corner of his mouth. "You caught me by surprise," he continued, "but I liked it." I was nervous, not knowing exactly what to say. My hands were sweating, and I found myself looking at him, trying to read his expression. Finally, I managed to reply, "That's good. I was afraid of how you'd react." He chuckled softly, as if amused by my anxiety, and then placed his hand on my knee for a brief moment, as if to reassure me. "Relax," he said, and that simple word was enough to make me feel a little safer. He kept driving, but now with a more serious air, as if he were thinking about something important. After a few seconds, he looked at me and asked, "Do you know why I asked you to come with me?" I shook my head, curious. "No. Why?" He smiled a bit awkwardly, but with a glint in his eyes that I was starting to recognize. "Because last night I wanted more, so I thought, if you came, we'd have more opportunities." I couldn't help but smile, feeling a warmth rise to my face. He was so direct, so sincere, that I didn't know whether to laugh or hide. I ended up doing both. "Oh, really? You're such a tease," I said, laughing softly. He laughed too, and for a moment, everything seemed so simple, so natural. The two of us there laughing together as if the world couldn't touch us. When we finished the visit, it was already night. The sky was dark, dotted with stars, and the silence of the road seemed to wrap us in a bubble of privacy. Halfway through the drive, he stopped the car on a small abandoned road, almost as if he had planned it. The engine was turned off, and the sound of the wind hitting the trees around us took over the environment. He looked at me, and I could see the intensity in his eyes, the same intensity that had emerged the night before. Without saying a word, he leaned in and started kissing me. What a delicious kiss, full of desire, bold yet tender. His hand explored my body, tracing every curve, every detail, as if he wanted to memorize everything. The mood heated up quickly, and before I knew it, we were getting out of the car. The night was cool, but the heat between us was enough to keep us warm. The grass under our feet, the distant sound of crickets, and the starry sky above our heads created the perfect setting, as if the universe was conspiring in our favor. Then he made me lean against the car, his hands firm but gentle, guiding me into position. I felt vulnerable, exposed, but in a way that was both scary and exciting. He didn't waste time, approaching me with a confidence that left me breathless. The pressure that followed was intense, hard to bear at first, but something in me knew it was right. The place, the atmosphere, the situation we were in, everything seemed to conspire to make that moment even more incredible. The night around us, the silence of the abandoned road, the heat of our bodies coming together. Gradually, I relaxed, surrendering to that sensation that was new, yet so familiar. Our bodies fit together, as if they were made for each other. Every movement, every breath, every exchanged glance seemed to create an even deeper connection between us. It was as if the world outside didn't exist, and only he and I remained, and the intensity of what we were experiencing. He held my waist firmly, his strong hands keeping me in place as we moved together. Every touch, every pressure made me delirious with pleasure. I felt the heat of his body against mine, his breath heavy near my ear, and the soft, rough sounds he made drove me completely wild. It was as if every sigh was a confirmation of what we were living. The connection between us was palpable, intense, and I surrendered completely to that feeling. The world around us disappeared, and only he and I remained, and that moment that seemed to last an eternity. After a while, his breathing became heavier, faster, and I knew he was reaching his peak. His movements intensified, each one deeper and more deliberate, until finally he exploded with pleasure, a muffled moan escaping his lips as his body trembled against mine. He didn't take long to help me get there too. His hands, once firm on my waist, now guided me with a mix of urgency and tenderness, as if he wanted to make sure I felt everything he had felt. And I did. Every touch, every movement brought me to a climax that seemed to last forever, leaving us both breathless and exhausted, but completely satisfied. When we recovered, the silence of the night enveloped us again. He looked at me with a tired but satisfied smile, and without needing words, we knew it was time to go. The drive back was peaceful, with a sense of complicity in the air, as if we had shared a secret only we understood. We got home, showered, and had dinner, but the energy between us was still there, pulsating, as if we weren't ready to let the day end. We went to bed, but before I could fall asleep, I felt him approach. His warm body fit against mine, and without needing words, it happened again. This time, it was slower, more intimate, as if we were exploring each other in a completely new way. But the details of that time, and the times before, well, I'll leave those for the uncut version. The link is in the comments. I hope you enjoyed the journey. Kisses and see you soon.